Well, we're all in exceptional times, and I think one thing that has done, Helen, is shown us just the importance of open spaces and parks, which is where you come in. I think, you're based in London, is that correct?
We're based in London, yeah. We work throughout the UK, but our head office is in London.
So you'll see firsthand just the valuable nature that parks and open spaces have, and perhaps a little bit of trepidation seeing how many people are actually using them when we probably shouldn't be doing it at the moment. So it must have been a little bit of a split feelings in that one, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, because I think that what this particular unprecedented set of circumstances has really reinforced is how valuable parks and green spaces are, as you say, to the health and well-being of communities. And that was how the Secretary of State phrased it a couple of weekends ago, when he said that his commitment was absolutely to keeping parks open, because they are so important to the health of the nation. But they're not equally important to health of the nation to everybody. We are not all experiencing this crisis in exactly the same way. So if you are living in a very dense urban area, and you don't have any private outdoor space, then the parks and green spaces are even more crucial than they are for those of us who are fortunate enough to have some green space of our own that we can use without the restrictions. And I think that's one of the things that has come out so strongly to us as an organisation over the past few weeks, is that without question, parks and green spaces are hugely valuable to all of us. I think that we are all realising just how important they are, and seeing how much of the current narrative and commentary is around parks and green spaces, and making sure that people continue to have access to them. I think in the main, local authorities have done a really good job of trying to make sure that those valuable community assets do stay open. But they're obviously, conflicting times, because, as you say, not everybody who is using them is observing, the requisite amount of social distancing when they are using the spaces, and they're not necessarily, passing through them. They might be spending more time in them than they should, and I think it's an incredibly difficult balance to strike.
I'm sure there's some people who are using their local parks now that have never ever been in them before.
No, absolutely. Well, we are currently conducting a survey that we've been pushing out through all of our different channels, and I'm sure that at the point that we've got the results from it, because it's going to be live for another few weeks yet, is to try and understand a little bit around parks usage from exactly that perspective. So what is happening for people? Are they using their parks more as a result of the fact that we are experiencing this, because they are unable to go anywhere else? Parks and green spaces are legislated as an acceptable daily exercise, and people who may previously have used may have gone swimming, used gyms, used all kinds of other recreational and exercise facilities, might be using those spaces much more than they did previously. And then for a lot of people who would have used their parks multiple times a day, particularly with small children, I think that's probably seen a decline. So we're really interested to try and find out what the trends are around that, really, and we hope that this kind of narrative around the importance and the value of these parks and green spaces is one positive message that can come out of a really difficult situation.
That's very much the case, obviously, but we all know that money is going to be a worrying issue going forward. Budgets. Nobody's going to doubt or argue the fact that large parts of that budget should be going towards the health and social care sector. So that's going to put a squeeze on the money that's there to look after the parks. Do you see that as an issue going forward, or is it balanced by the fact that we now see parks as a slightly more important element within our lifestyles?
I think it's definitely got to be that we recalibrate what our expectation is of parks and green spaces. So when we're thinking about, as you've just said, budget being directed towards health and social services, we've got to see parks and green spaces as a health service. And I think unless we give them that kind of priority, then we are going to continue to be in this very challenged position where, as a non-statutory service, they are necessarily at the bottom of the pile for some very competitive funding. But I think what we need to try and do through this is see, and I say through this, but this would be the argument that we as an organisation have been making for a long time, is that we need to not see Parks and Green Spaces as part of the Parks and Green Spaces department. We need to see them as being absolutely pivotal to a whole range of other really significant public service agendas, and where we know that there is massive drain on the public purse because of all of these other issues. Parks and Green Spaces can play a really valuable role in offsetting some of that draw further upstream.
It's a strong argument. Obviously, it's a strong argument, but I'm sure there will be pressure in those budgets. What sort of difficulties and challenges do you think that's going to create to the guys at the front end, the guys that are looking after those parks and open spaces?
I think that they're going to continue to face the same challenges as they've been facing for a long time, to a certain extent. I don't think that anybody who's currently a frontline practitioner, any of the Parks and Green Space guys that you would speak to on a regular basis, would say that that's been their experience for a very long time, and that they are increasingly managing difficult situations with very little budget to be able to provide the service that they want to provide. So I think that there probably will be, to a certain extent, there will be, hopefully, in some instances, communities will be able to respond. I think there's going to be kind of a difference in terms of our sense of community as a result of coming out of the other side of this process. And I would hope again that there's kind of some positives to be drawn from that, and that we will need to continue to be creative as a sector as to how we both position Parks and Green Spaces so that they do manage to draw investment in from the budget across the local authority, and that they're seen as something that can help elsewhere. And also that we continue to look at new and innovative ways to be able to bring funding into parks.
What can Fields and Trust do to help facilitate that? Have you got the doors open of the corridors of power at Westminster level or local authority level, where you can try and have a little bit of influence along those lines?
Well, we are part of the Parks Action Group, which is MHCLG's primary vehicle for the sector in terms of it being both its action and listening committee, if you like, as a result of the Select Committee inquiry into parks in 2016, and we play an active part in that panel along with the LGA, the National Federation of Parks and Green Spaces, Groundwork, the National Trust, Heritage, etc. And I think that what we all try and do as a collective group of sector organisations there is really push the agenda for Parks and Green Spaces as much and as high up that priority list as we possibly can. And it will be no surprise to you that everybody sits around that table kind of comes at that from a very similar perspective, that we all see the incredible value that Parks and Green Spaces bring to communities, and what we use that as an opportunity to try and do is to have the opportunity to look through it through a slightly different lens. I think we struggle to get money into Parks and Green Spaces in a way that we don't struggle to get money into sport, and that's probably because there is a much clearer route to evaluation. We've got a much clearer throughput that you can see what the impact is of investing in a particular facility, and you have much more exact quantifiable figures as a result of that. Whereas Parks and Green Spaces, by their nature, they're free at the point of access, and so they should be. But that can make it quite difficult to be able to produce a proper kind of cost-benefit analysis of what we're investing in.
Do you think the value of the guys that look after these parks and open spaces is fully appreciated? I've always equated guys that do that job, whether it be on golf courses, parks, gardens, the rest of things, they're a little bit like the borrowers, that nobody actually sees them doing any work, but it's all done, and the only time they ever come out is when they've got a complaint. So it would be nice if we were out banging plates and clapping hands for them occasionally, perhaps.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that they are one of the they're one of the key workers who are out there at the moment doing a really vital job to make sure that the Parks and Green Spaces that do remain open are clean, are safe, that people can continue to go out and use them. They are getting a lot more footfall than usual, so all of those things become very, very important. And I think that local authorities are rightly making sure through their great teams of people that those spaces remain available. I mean, I think it's a particularly difficult time, but we know anecdotally that there is a massive increase in, as you would expect, in the use of parks, and that has meant that the service that is going into them needs to be ramped up. Even down to the straightforward things like bins need emptying more often because more people are using spaces.
Yeah.
I think in general terms, though, on the point around the people who keep our parks and green spaces going, then that job has morphed unrecognisably over the past 15 years, because we expect them to be able to do such a great different range of tasks now, that probably was not what they imagined for those people who came into it from a horticulture background, and now are looking to do income generation, community outreach, working with volunteers, looking at staging events. It's such a portfolio role now, that I think that we definitely should recognise the great work that they do.
Looking 10 years down the line, what would your hopes be for your sector? What would your hopes be for what we've got out there in the countryside and urban open spaces and that type of thing?
I would hope that we recognise the importance of equitable distribution of parks and green spaces. So as an organisation, Fields and Trust is very, we're very conscious of the fact that not everybody has the same level of access to good quality parks and green spaces. More than 2.6 million people in the UK live more than a 10-minute walk from a park or green space, and 10 minutes is generally accepted to be the reasonable distance by which you derive most health and wellbeing benefits, because you're more likely to use that space more often. So I would like to see that there was more consideration for the provision and the equitable provision of parks and green spaces for all of our communities, that we are looking at the projections forward and considering where population is going to grow, and having that kind of front and foremost when we're looking at new developments, and making sure that the provision of parks and green spaces within those developments is free at the point of access, communal, not limited, and something that we're giving proper consideration to. I mean, we have done research that shows that low socioeconomic groups value parks and green spaces more than twice as much as average respondents, which is very much chiming with the narrative at the moment about how people are really we're really seeing that disparity in terms of where parks and green spaces are really needed. And I think that there is more to be done around making sure that, as I said, that we're positioning these spaces not just as parks and green spaces, but as real community assets that have the ability and do contribute to the health, well-being and happiness of our communities, and that we recognise them as playing that role, and we invest in them so that they can continue to generate that real positive outcome.